Hey folks, welcome back. I'm glad you watched the first part of the video with Miss Nancy Lewis. Now, this is the second part of the conversation where she basically discussed post-transplant, how difficult of a journey it could be. I know because I'm also a double lung transplant recipient. So please sit back and enjoy, and thank you for subscribing.
Welcome back, Lung Transplant Nation. I have Miss Nancy Lewis with us. The last time we left her, she got the call finally. She was on hold for 18 months, people. 18 months. She was on the waiting list. That's just amazing. That is amazing. I mean, to have that determination, Nancy, to not knowing when they're gonna call you, but when they finally did, you got to the hospital, then take us from there, please.
At least I was at home. 18 months is a long time, but at least I was at home.
Absolutely.
So I had my transplant. Because of my pulmonary hypertension, it was a difficult transplant, as they had warned me that it would be. Pulmonary hypertension means that your heart is working very hard to push the blood through your body, so it becomes very large. So they call it heart failure, which is just like a terrible term. Sounds like your heart is just given up.
Listen, Nancy, just hearing you, it's like you basically tell me my own case because that's what I had. I had an enlarged heart. So my first thing I did was I went to see a cardiologist because they were like, something's wrong with your heart. Your heart is enlarged. So it's spending years at a cardiologist to determine, okay, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it the pulmonary hypertension that enlarges my heart? Or is it some heart failure? They went to the whole family history and so forth and so on, just trying to figure out what was it. But yes, go ahead. But it was the actual pulmonary hypertension that puts so much undue stress on my heart, so that an enlarged heart. So for the latest scan we had was that my heart is slowly getting back to normal. Thank God. But go ahead.
So mine did not, but that's why the transplant was hard. That's what they told me, is that the heart is still trying to do what it's been doing. And it doesn't really realize that there's good lungs now. It doesn't have to work so hard. So every time they tried to extubate me, take the, breathing thing out of my throat, my heart would just, go crazy, and they'd have to intubate me again. So it took quite a while to get me off the vent. So it was 8 days in my case, I think yours as well. And finally, they were able to get me off the vent and slowly, ease off the drugs, and I could sort of regain consciousness. So 8 days is a long time to be unconscious and not moving, basically.
Yeah.
And my husband has these horrifying pictures of me just lying in bed with that thing down my throat.
Almost comatose, basically. Yeah. Like you're comatose. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I have those pictures too. Unfortunately, yeah, no, you're right. And it's funny. Yeah. They took me about a week to quote unquote woke me up because they thought they thought I had some brain damage because I lost so much blood because I use, I don't know if they do that. What they call an ECMO. They have to put a machine to help with my blood circulation because I have something called factor 5, some sort of a blood disorder that I didn't even know. And then so the machine had to really work so hard. I had to get so much blood in there. So it took them about a week to quote unquote woke me up. But anyway, please continue.
You're not really awake. So I didn't even realize that I'd had a transplant. Like, I was just out of it. And when I woke up, my husband was there, and I was like, did I have a transplant? Like, I didn't even know what had happened. And, then they're there and they say, can you lift your hand? And I could maybe lift my hand just slightly off the bed, maybe. And then it just falls right back down.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I was so freaked out. It was like I did all that work for 2 years and it's gone. It's all gone.
All
And
your
oh
motor
my,
skills, all the motor skills are shot.
what
Yeah,
have I done? Oh my
yeah.
God.
Scary
Um,
stuff. Scary stuff. Yep.
Very scary. And I
Mhm.
was on a lot of drugs and I was really groggy and confused and I could hardly talk and I had no strength at all. And slowly weaning me off the drugs. So I got out of the ICU pretty quickly, I think, to step down. But then I got a lung infection back up to the ICU.
Oh,
And so they took care of that and back down to step down. And I was on step down and slowly starting to get better. This was still within a couple of weeks, I guess. And they were giving me physio and things. And then I got a blood infection, sepsis,
oh,
back up to the ICU again. And then back down to step down. And so it was the first couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I think, were bad, really difficult. And I still was just very, like, I realize now I was hallucinating all these things,
oh
thinking that
yeah.
I was all these places that it took me a long time to realize none of that ever happened. But in my mind, it wasn't scary, but it
Hmm.
was just so real. All
Well,
these places that I
you know,
was and
you know,
people I was,
yeah, you're absolutely right because that's one thing they did warn me. They said, look, listen, people react differently, and to people out there that are pre-transplant, people react differently under hallucinations, and these drugs are like the heaviest drugs you would ever have in your life. I mean, so I don't know how far deep it goes, but yeah, it can be scary because I remember it's like my thing was like I was in a video game for some reason, and I don't even play video games. It's like a little cartoon. It's like I was one of the cartoons, and it's funny, Nancy. Every night I go back to where I left off the night before. It's the weirdest thing. I'm like this little cartoon, like a little Pac-Man game they used to have, but like a different version, just running all night long. I was like, oh my, this can't be, So that was my hallucination. But some other people can have some really horrific hallucinations, and like they're screaming, So it all depends on the person, on how you react to certain drugs, and I think that's why I don't know if they did that to you, but for me, well, I had the boots to help my thing shape, but at some point for a lot of people they put some kind of a restriction on you, like so they say so you don't hurt yourself. They will restrict your movement from your legs and from especially when you're under these heavy drugs. So it's real. You're right.
I don't recall being restrained, but I do recall, it's funny you say video game. For me, it was like I was inside a computer program. Such a weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a white screen. My husband would come to visit me and he was like I could hear him,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't talk. And
Yeah.
he was like a black dot. And he'd move across the screen
Mm-hmm.
and then he'd sit beside me and hold my hand. And he was like this black ball. I'm sitting here, he'd say, Nancy, and I'm here and I love you. And he'd hold my hand and I could feel him hold my hand,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't move. And
Mm-hmm.
there was just like this white screen in front of me. It was like a computer screen. And I think this is when I was still really under. And it would fill up with this black something that was sort of seeping down from the top. And and then I'd start coughing and feeling really horrible and they'd wipe it away and then it was white again. And I think it was me when they were trying to extubate me.
Mm-hmm.
But every time they did, I'd get real hypoxic and I'd start throwing up, and they'd have to intubate me again.
Mhm.
And I think that was my brain sort of filling it in that way. So strange.
I
And
mean,
then after, in step down, I dreamed that the step down was like outside the hospital grounds in some little building, and there I'd be, and then I'd wake up back in the hospital again. But I really believed it was happening. And people that I didn't know, but I'd go stay with them. Well, we're going to do your step down here. And then I'd be back in the hospital. It was like just the weirdest thing. And I believed it. And I had that thing too, where it would be a continuation of the story from before,
yeah.
or it would be a repeat of basically the same story. And I'm like, this is weird because I already did this, but here I am again. And it took me, I would say, 6 weeks to really realize the extent of those hallucinations,
Yeah.
and all that stuff that I thought was happening never happened at all. So weird. I've never experienced anything like that. And when I woke up, I had a trach. So I couldn't speak and I couldn't
Yeah.
eat.
Mhm.
So I was being fed through a tube,
Yeah.
and I had no strength at all. And I was really scared to even sit up, let alone stand up. And they tried to get me on a walker. And I was just so scared. And I
Mhm.
would get shaky and I was weak. And I was like, no, no, no. And then the next day I'd go back and I'd try it again and it was okay.
Yeah.
And I could do it. So the really, it was all you're just so helpless. And you're wearing diapers and you're shitting yourself. Like it's just awful. But and then finally I come
Listen,
out.
you're back to being a baby. I mean,
Yeah,
to,
totally.
to me, that's just the way I see it. It's like I was back to be a baby, and a lot of time. I mean, that's what I would love to see. If there's a study like when people, whether it's just lung transplant, any kind of transplant, but lung transplant is like the hardest transplant to do. Um, if they're gonna study how the brain works, because everything is believable, Nancy. Everything you see or you think you hear, it's so real to you, even though deep down inside, I'm like, this can't be real. You see what I'm saying? So it's almost like you back in being a baby. Because I remember even with the tricks, I couldn't talk, so I wanted to write something, for the nurse, and I had my wife bring like one of the kids' old, little, a board that we used to have as a kid, with a little felt pen, something very light, like a baby can pick up. I couldn't even pick it up. I couldn't even pick
Yeah.
up that pen, like my hand, my fingers, the coordination. I was like, oh my God. My mind knew what I wanted to write. My mind knew what I wanted to say, but my body wasn't cooperating.
Yeah.
I was a little big baby, just trying to talk, trying to, to say something. It's like you were back. It's like it's just a humbling experience. You're
Yeah.
back to being a baby.
I was back in the same floor of the ward where I was in step down and then on the regular ward. And I know that ward because I spent a month there. Um, and I just peeked in the door and I was just trying to walk around a bit between appointments. And I know that I can go in there and walk around.
Mhm.
God knows I've walked around there enough times, but it's just I couldn't step in because
Mhm.
it just I remembered how helpless I felt and how confused and weak and dependent, and it it was really scary. I mean, I wasn't really scared at the time because I did have faith that I would get through this.
Mhm.
I was still optimistic, and
Oh
I
yeah,
could see
you gotta have the
that
right mindset. Yep.
like at the beginning I would struggle to sit up, and then one day I sat up, and I was like, oh look, I can sit up now. And the physio people would come and they'd help me stand up, right? Two people with my arms just helping me to stand. And one day I stood by myself. And I'm like, I can stand up now. And it was really great because I could see that things were coming back and coming back quickly, which was great because at the beginning I was like, I lost everything. What a mistake. And day by day there would be improvements. And the nurses could see it, and I could see it, and other people could see it. Eventually I got the trach out and I could talk. That was nice. And I tend to be a bit you know, jokey, let's say. And so the nurses would laugh because suddenly here I'm talking and
There's somebody with a
joking with them.
personality. Yeah, there's somebody
Yes,
with a personality. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
right.
Absolutely.
And it was really gratifying to see that things could come back, but so slow. And I was just so, and I don't know, time sort of, I was in there a month, and a month isn't very long, I guess, but it is long
It is.
when that's your world. And I remember eating for the first time when I got the trach out, and I never thought hospital food could taste that good. It was fantastic. I was like so
It's been
happy
such
to
a
be able to
long
eat.
time since you had
Yes,
anything for real. Because trust me, it's like with the trachs, some of them are like cold. I could feel it going down. It's like, oh, So when they're feeding you in that tube. But let me ask you the $1,000,000 question. What were your thoughts when you actually realized I'm breathing on my own now? How
for
did
me,
that?
it happened quite quickly, and even when the rest of my body was like the very first thing they took out was the oxygen. I was, they had me on a very on a cannula on a very low dose, just to be sure.
Mhm.
But it, I didn't really need it. And when I was still in fairly high level step down, the nurse said, how much oxygen are you on? And I said 2 liters, but I don't think I really need it. And he said, I don't think you do either. And he just took it out.
Mhm.
And I was fine. I was fine. And that was like 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I wasn't even walking or anything by then.
Yeah.
And the oxygen was out. And the surgeon told my husband that the transplant itself went very well. Like the lungs just went in there was hardly any bleeding. I'm not worried about the lungs at all. I'm worried about the heart and the rest of the body recovering, which I didn't find out till later. But the transplant itself was fine. And when the oxygen came out, I'd already been aware that I didn't think I really needed it, that it wasn't really doing anything for me. And the only hard part was learning how to breathe again properly
Mhm.
because I had been, shallow, fast breathing for years.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the physio people would take me for a walk and they'd say, breathe deeply. And I'm like, I don't know how. I can't remember what it feels like to breathe like that. And it got quite frustrating. It was saying like, breathe deep. It was like, how? So, they sort of talked to me about just when you're in your bed, say, and it's quiet, just lie there and relax and just try to breathe in slowly and breathe out slowly and just relax. And within a week, I was fine. And I didn't have to do that shallow breathing anymore. But it
Let,
was a
let-
bit of a
mhm.
struggle to learn how to do it.
Let me tell you something. This is like one of the things that we take for granted as people, which is breathing because it's automatic, quote unquote. That's what we think. And then, like you said, I've been a shallow breather all my life, and I didn't know that. I didn't. You just if you're not like a I don't know an athlete or somebody who does some kind of performance art or who does yoga, who meditate, most people are just shallow breathers and you don't think about that. So yeah, they have to teach me how to breathe deeply. One of the analogy they made is like look like, for example, like a goldfish or something like that, how when they breathe, like the side of their belly expands. So I had like to really think and slowly learning how to expand my, your belly area to breathe deeper. It was amazing. It was amazing that all my breathing was like up here and up here and up, nothing lower than that. And and for people, out there, especially, your pre-transplant, really, listen, get your meditation things out. I mean, what if you have Peloton meditation? Or best yet, you go on YouTube and it's for free. You go on YouTube, you'll find a lot of people out there that will basically teach you basic breathing. You don't even have to go crazy. Just do some basic deep breathing, because all these things, along with eating properly, along with doing like, rehab or exercise before, it comes a long way from post-transplant, because this is when, you go into PT and all that stuff. So it helps that you build up that endurance, because that's a very tough surgery, very hard surgery. Because, man, I think I lost 40 pounds like overnight, because my surgery was from the 21st to the 22nd. It took me on 10:30 at night. And from what they told me, it didn't end till like 5 o'clock, or, almost 8 hours. And the reason they said that it took that long because, of the bleeding situation. So like, overnight, I lost like 40 pounds. I mean, that's how hard this surgery can be. So the more you can prepare yourself ahead of time, the more you can prepare yourself ahead of time to do that, it's very important. One thing I wanted to circle back on, when you were talking about when your doctor requested that, you go on oxygen, and then you kind of, rebuff that idea. And I felt the same thing happened to me. I don't know if it's something that's psychological, or if it's because I'm a tourist, I'm stubborn. It was just that I fought it so hard, because I felt like, for some reason, it diminished me, okay, as a human being. I mean, I'm like 6'3", I was like 280 pounds. I'm a big guy. And I felt like walking around on oxygen, for some reason, in my mind, wrongly, that it made me weak. I even bought a portable oxygen, out of pocket, the little ones you carry, so I don't have to push a tank and everything else. But I would use it in my car, no problem, whenever, picking up kids or whatever. But for some reason, I was ashamed of it for a long time. So I don't know if it's something that you had encountered. I don't know if it's a question of pride, if it's a question of, we feel that maybe our health took a turn that we didn't want to, that we hear that we don't want to, face it. Sometimes you're in a situation you don't want to face reality per se. Because I remember I put myself under duress. Like, even it got to a point where I was dropping off my kids, so they could, go play, their tennis matches or whatever. And I'll be in the parking lot, and if I had to use a restroom, I would park the closer I can get to the restroom, because I didn't want to carry the oxygen with me. But I'm telling you, literally the restroom is like 40 steps away. And I had a hard time completing that without stopping, because I didn't have the oxygen. So did you feel like you rebuffing the oxygen was more like a psychological thing, that you felt like you were being diminished, that it was, because that's how I felt. That's how I felt. I didn't want to admit it to myself. But later on, I realized, like, you know what? That's how I felt, which was very foolish, people. Please, if your doctor requires you to be on oxygen, put your pride aside, okay? Whether you're a tourist like me or not, put your pride aside, because that can really help you with your breathing, with all your other, you know, tissues and vital organs, because they all work in coercion with each other. So did you feel like you rebuffing the whole idea of oxygen, say something a little deeper than you not wanting to do it? Was there something else behind it?
For me, I was never embarrassed about wearing the oxygen once I had it. I know a lot of people really struggle with going out in public with their oxygen, but it wasn't that for me.
Yeah,
Um, Once I finally got it, I was like, wow, this is great. And I don't care what people say.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't care. For me, it was, if I go on oxygen, I'm I'm starting down a path that leads to my biggest fear, which is transplant. So I can delay it by not taking that first step, which
Mhm.
is dumb,
I know.
dumb.
I know.
But it wasn't the same as you, and I was never embarrassed about it. And in fact, I often kind of liked it because, like, I don't drive, so in those days I would, impossible though it seems now, take public transit to get to my appointments and stuff.
Mhm.
And I've got oxygen, and people stand up for me and open doors for me. I'm like, this
That
is
is awesome.
awesome. This is
It's
great.
like, why can't we be all nice like that all the time, huh?
Yeah, it's lovely. So, and it allows me to do it, to get out there. So I was never embarrassed about it. I mean, I've been sick for a long time, and I've dealt with a lot of things, and I have like my, I never know how this works, but my hands are really affected by the scleroderma. Like, I have
Mm.
some visible physical disabilities, and so it's like, man, that's just what I am. I'm not ashamed of it. And yeah, no, I never, once I finally got it and started using it and saw how much better it made me feel, I was on board. The only big drag about it was worrying if I was going to have enough oxygen to get where I needed to go and get home again. That was always the concern. So, now that I've had the transplant, a lot of people say, wow, it must be so great not to have to drag the oxygen and have the cannula and everything. And it is, but it's the stress of dragging that thing around and
Mm.
worrying how much it's left, and can I conserve, and will they, let me go on the wall oxygen at my appointment, and all that stuff is
Yeah.
much more stressful than you know, than being in public with that.
I mean,
The,
there's a lot of calculation because I remember even when I had to go to pulmonary rehab, it got to a point that my portable wasn't enough, so I had to have like pure oxygen. So
yeah,
yeah, I bought myself a little trolley to
yeah,
push it around. So so no, it got to a point it got so bad, so I was like, damn shame, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter at some point. It was like in between when when mostly I felt like, I can try to fool myself, but when it got to the point I was on 12 liters at home, I was like, okay,
yeah,
that was that. Either I don't go anywhere. If I have to go somewhere, I have my oxygen on
yeah.
but yeah, it took me a while to, get around that. All right, before we finish wrapping up our second segment, one thing I want to ask you fairly quickly is how important it is to have, your husband there or any, family and loved ones to support you, through that journey. Can you, you know, just speak a couple of minutes? We got about 8 minutes left. How important you think you believe that was for you in your journey to get to the other side?
Oh God, I couldn't imagine being alone. I mean, it was hard because he was really stressed.
Mhm.
So he would, like, and still working, come by the hospital several times a day, and I could see him getting more and more tired. And especially the first few weeks were very scary, like way worse for him than for me, because I didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, you're in it. You're just fighting. You're just fighting, basically. Yeah, you don't have any kind of peripheral, of what is really involved, except for you to get to the next step, and that's the most important thing. Like once you go through that, you gotta just step little step by step, and then So yeah, no, absolutely, I totally understand. Yeah.
But, he's always there and always supporting me. And like, I can't imagine being alone. A lot of people sort of say, the hospital says I have to have a support person, and I don't. What can I do? But, like, you need it. Although I have to say, the social worker at the hospital told him that he needed to be with me 24 hours a day when I got home. And after I was a month in the hospital just recovering, then I went for a month to rehab, which was great. So I was in inpatient rehab for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was getting physio every day, and they're really driving you, you know.
Oh
And
yeah.
I had physio every day and um, occupational therapy every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And uh, I just gained so much more strength
Mm-hmm.
so that by the time I got home, I mean, I was still weak and tired, but I was really pretty good.
You're independent. I mean, as
Yeah,
independent as you could, and which
yeah,
is the key, and that's why they drive you at, you know, really at physical and occupational therapy. Because I remember my physical therapist, I mean, you know, wonderful gentleman, and he was like, listen, you know, you thought, you know, yes, your transplant was hard, but sorry to say, you really had nothing to do with that. But this, you have everything to do with it, and I'm gonna push you. And there are times you're probably gonna want to slap me, but it's because I want you, when we do send you home, I want to feel confident and comfortable that you can do those things, you know, for yourself on your own. I was like, okay, let's do it. No, yeah.
and I really wanted it. Like they'd come in and they'd say, "Do you think you're ready to try to use the toilet instead of the commode?" And I'm like, "Yes, please." Like any little step
Mm-hmm,
towards being more independent and being able to go home. Like
mm-hmm.
I didn't want to stay for a month in rehab, but I knew that I needed it.
Yeah,
And so I really maximized my opportunity to gain more strength. And so, you know, when I finally was able to walk with a walker on my own, I would be up and walking around the ward several times a day, which a lot of people did not do. I saw people around me not doing it, but I did it because I knew that it would help me go home. The guy in the next bed to me in the regular ward, he would go out and he'd be back in like 3 minutes and say, "Whoa, that was really hard. I really walked far." And I'm thinking, you know, I did way more than he did. And he just wanted to go home. And I get it.
mm-hmm.
Like, it's not nice to be in the hospital.
No, no,
But, you know, I was determined to maximize what I gained from there in order to be able to go home. And
exactly.
so this all started with your question about loved ones. And pretty quickly, like, so my husband was really like, "Don't get up, don't go anywhere, don't use your walker." And he saw pretty quickly that I was able to do things. I didn't need the walker. It was actually more trouble than it was worth. Our house is very small, so I'm banging into the walls. Just put my hand out to the wall and take it slow and be very careful. And I never fell in my house. Actually, I only fell once in the hospital. And he said, "Well, you don't actually need me here all the time, do you?" No. You know, he'd make me turn on the light to go to the bathroom at night. Fine. It's okay. But, you know, I was really able to start doing things like, you know, having a shower without a shower chair pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I needed it. And he would sort of hover around a bit, but
Yeah, sure.
he could see that I could do it.
Yeah.
And so it, you know, it freed him up. It wasn't nearly as bad as they had led him to believe that it might be. And it would be for some people, but
Yeah.
I had pushed so hard in rehab that I was pretty good.
I think one thing that's important, you know, for people to understand is that not only being grateful for loved ones to be there for you, and loved ones to me can be friends, they can be family, they can be distant relatives. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a spouse, but somebody who's dedicated, you know, to be there for you, and definitely should be grateful for that. But by the same token, it is your duty to do the best that you can, so you alleviate some of that burden for that person. And I think that as you're making progress And I think for them, it's such a relief that they don't feel like, okay, they have to do everything for you. So I think it works both ways. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you are very grateful, for their help, their attentiveness, and all that. But it is your duty as well to show them that, hey, I'm making progress, and little by little, I'm doing things to remove some of that burden for you, because it's not just a physical burden, it's an emotional burden as well. So I think they all of it works hand in hand. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
that
And
is very important.
our other duty is to honor the donor and this incredible gift that we received
Yes, indeed.
and not squander it.
Yes, indeed. Yep. And it's funny sometimes, Facebook group that we belong to. Sometimes you hear people saying like, their spouse don't want to do this or they don't feel like doing it, and I'm like, you didn't go through all that process. You didn't go through all that process. Get those lungs, and for you to now mentally checking out. It doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Now, if you're physically incapable, I can understand that, because I know it took me a long time. And my right leg was damaged in the ECMO. It took me 2 weeks before I could even move the leg, not lift it, move the leg. So it was very frustrating for me. And for me to start walking I had like a high walk. I couldn't get up. I mean, you name it. But I had a duty to literally do everything mentally and physically to pull myself out of there, because not just everything went through the gift that we were given by the family's donor, that one of their loved ones had to die for us to receive that gift. You have to honor that. You have to honor your family, uh, who's been there every step of the way, who's been there for you, and not just physically, mentally, emotionally. Because when things like that happen, almost everything else is suspended. And from you had yours in what, 2021, right? Like me.
No, 2022, just
Oh, 20,
July this year.
oh my goodness. Oh yes, that's right. That's right. I remember you said that before. Just July. Oh my goodness. So you're a newbie. I mean, listen, Nancy, you're doing awesome, because I'm telling you, it took me a long time. Even though when I got home after almost 7 weeks post transplant, it took me a really, really long time to get things going and everything else. But because, like I said, I had more damage, more blood loss, due to the ECMO. But so one thing I must, I got to tell you is, I think slowly but surely, obviously I'm not a doctor, disclaimer, everything here is just for conversation, people. We're not doctors. But one thing I did notice, like I said, after about 9 months or so, up to the year, they see that my heart is slowly but surely regaining form. So all this takes time, because I remember when I asked the doctor, so like, how long do you think, like, my leg, when is it gonna feel like normal again? Because I'm still wearing a brace. I'm gonna walk around fine. I'm still wearing a brace. It was like the nerves are like, um, he said something. I mean, don't quote me, but it's something to paraphrase, like the nerves heal something like 10 millimeters every month or something, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, he was like, you're here for the long haul. It's just gonna take time, because you had a major operation, and it was damage to that operation. So don't get frustrated. You just gonna, but do your exercise, do your workout, and whatever you need to do to strengthen that leg, because not only I did pulmonary rehab before, I even went to rehab, post transplant. I did about 2.5 months, of rehab, and I might go again after the winter. It's getting too cold for me to. But it's just like, you have to be patient, but also you got to be positive. You got to be thankful. Um, and that's that. To be honest with you, you know. Well, anything
Yeah,
else you wanna say to wrap up the last minute and a half that we have, Nancy?
I have I have been very lucky, and I've healed very well and very quickly, considering. So I'm still less than 6 months out. It's an incredible gift. It transformed my life completely, and I'm so grateful. And I just look back at my biggest fear, lung transplant, and think it's the biggest gift I've ever had in my life. And I am grateful for it every single day.
Yeah. Hmm. Absolutely. Well, Nancy Lewis out of Toronto, Canada, which I know, fairly well. My wife is Canadian, so you know. Thank you so much for taking the time for doing this, for sharing your story with us. I mean, you're a newbie. I mean, I'm 13 months,
I am.
so you're a newbie, but you're looking great. You're doing well. God bless you. Uh, Thank you. We will do this again sometime in the near future. I appreciate your participation in this. Have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year if we don't talk prior. Okay?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, folks, for taking the time for watching both videos of Nancy Louise' conversation. I want to really thank Nancy for taking the time out of a busy schedule to spend the time with me to talk about what transplant patients go through before transplant and post-transplant, because there's two sets of thoughts there. Before transplant, there are certain things that needs to be done medically, even with regard to your personal health, how you should prepare yourself for a transplant. This is a whole new, different conversation we can always have. But I really want to thank you for taking the time of your day to watch this. And I think it's very important for people that are pre-transplant and those people in those people that are even post-transplant, because I find it therapeutic myself to talk about what I went through to somebody that went through the same. So I really hope you enjoy this and look for some more conversations coming to you very soon. Thank you very much.